The Galactic Military Academy was the largest school for warriors in this part of the galaxy. It was built on a great metal station that floated between two suns. Its walls shone like silver, and its training halls were so wide that ships could land inside them. The academy took cadets from many worlds, from planets of ice, from worlds of burning deserts, and even from the deep oceans of water worlds. Here the strongest and fastest of many races trained side by side. They learned weapons, they learned strategy, and most of all they learned to fight in ways that would help them in war. Today there was a strange energy in the air. The corridors were full of low voices and quick glances. Some cadets were whispering while others smiled in doubt. A new cadet had arrived, and that cadet was human. Humans were rare here, very rare. They came from a place the aliens called a Deathworld, a planet so dangerous that its forests had beasts larger than ships, and its oceans had storms that could swallow cities. It was said that even the air and the ground on a Deathworld could try to kill you. Yet somehow humans survived and even thrived there. To many cadets this made humans interesting, but it also made them a little frightening. In the training hall a tall insectoid cadet clicked his mandibles as he spoke to a wide-shouldered reptilian friend. They wondered if the human could keep up. They had seen pictures of humans before. Soft skin, no claws, no scales, no natural armor. To them the human looked weak. Others agreed. They said maybe humans were clever, but cleverness could not save you in the combat ring. Still some cadets kept looking at the doors, curious to see for themselves. Then the heavy metal doors of the hall opened, and in walked Cadet Rin Hale. He was not as tall as most of the others. His body was lean but solid. His eyes moved like the eyes of a hunter, calm yet watchful. His black hair was cut short, and his plain uniform looked almost too simple among the bright armor and decorated gear of the other cadets. He did not walk quickly, yet every step seemed sure and steady. The whispers followed him as he crossed the hall. The instructor for the day, a grizzled avian with feathers of iron gray, stepped into the center of the combat circle. His sharp voice carried over the sound of the crowd. Today, he said, there would be a special drill, 1 cadet against 10 opponents. The crowd made a wave of noise at that. Such drills were rare and only done for testing skill and control. The avian's beak curved slightly when he turned toward Rin, his voice calm but clear as he said the human cadet would be the one to stand. Alone against 10, the air in the hall shifted at once. Some cadets laughed, others grinned. They thought this was going to be quick. Rin said nothing. His face did not change. He stepped into the ring without looking at the aliens who laughed. He stood at the center, feet planted, hands loose at his sides. His eyes scanned the space slowly, measuring distance, measuring each face. The instructor began calling names. The first opponent was a tall reptilian with a heavy tail and thick muscles. The second was an insectoid with 4 arms. The third a furred warrior from a cold moon, with claws like blades. One by one the names were called until 10 stood in a wide circle around Rin. They held training weapons that could knock a fighter down, but not kill. Their armor plates clinked as they moved. The air hummed with the sound of power cells in their gear. The reptilian, Zorik, stepped forward and looked at Rin with eyes that glowed faint yellow. His deep voice rolled across the hall as he said, "Human, try not to cry when you lose." His words drew more laughter from the watching crowd. Rin's gaze met his without a word. The instructor raised 1 claw and spoke the rules. No permanent injuries. The fight ends when all on one side are down. The chime will signal the start and end. The fighters took ready stances. The smell of metal and sweat filled the air. The chime rang, high and sharp, but Rin did not move. He stayed in the center, hands still loose. His eyes followed the smallest motions of the ones around him. The alien fighters began to move in, slowly at first, testing him, waiting for him to show fear or weakness. The crowd leaned forward, hungry to see the human stumble. But Rin only watched, his body relaxed but ready, and there was something in that stillness that made a few of the smarter cadets quiet their laughter, because they could. See, he was not frozen with fear. He was waiting for something. The circle of attackers tightened. Footsteps echoed in the hall. Zorik's heavy boots thudded against the floor as he moved in from the left. The insectoid's claws clicked as it closed in from the right. The furred warrior shifted his grip on his weapon and came in from the front. They were closing the gap. The first strike would come in seconds. The air felt thicker. The crowd grew quieter, and in the center Hale's breathing stayed slow and steady. His weight shifted, just slightly, onto the balls of his feet, the smallest sign that he was about to move. And for the first time the aliens around him felt a flicker of doubt about the fight they thought would be easy. The circle of alien cadets tightened around Ren, the air thick with heat from training lights and the tension of many eyes watching, the scent of metal and sweat mixing into something sharp and heavy. Above in the raised seats other cadets leaned forward, eager to see the human fail, to watch the so-called Deathworlder collapse under the weight of 10 skilled opponents. Some were whispering wagers in low voices, trading credits over who would knock him down first, and many agreed it would be Zorak the reptilian with his massive frame and crushing strikes. Zorak shifted his weight and let his heavy tail drag slowly behind him as if daring Ren to look down. His scaled mouth curved into a grin that showed sharp teeth. He spoke loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Human, you should drop your weapon now before you embarrass yourself." Though Ren carried no weapon at all, only his empty hands and calm gaze, the reptilian's words drew loud laughter. The insectoid fighter clicked its mandibles in a mocking rhythm as if to make fun of Ren's stillness. Another cadet from the icy moon bared long claws and scraped them against the arena floor, sending a harsh screech into the air. The instructor stood at the edge of the combat circle, his iron-gray feathers catching the light, his expression unreadable as he waited for the fight to begin. The chime had not yet sounded. This was the moment when most fighters showed nerves or gave away their first move with a twitch or shift. But Ren did not even blink. His breathing was slow and even, his shoulders loose, his eyes drifting from one opponent to the next in silence. And this quiet made some of the mockers grow uneasy, though they did not admit it even to themselves. Zorak snorted and looked at the others around the ring, his voice booming as he said, "On my mark, we crush him." The insectoid hissed in agreement. The furred warrior from the cold moon grinned with teeth made for tearing. Another cadet, a tall avian with hooked claws, tapped the floor impatiently. They wanted the chime to sound. They wanted the chance to prove that the Deathworlder was nothing but a fragile creature of soft skin and empty threats. The moment stretched, the crowd murmured, and then the sharp chime rang through the hall, the signal to begin. Zorak surged forward first, his heavy boots pounding the floor in a steady rhythm. The insectoid darted in from the right, with forearms moving like blades. The furred warrior came straight from the front, claws raised high, and behind them the others began to close in to surround Ren completely, their movements forming a tightening cage of muscle, armor, and weapons. Still Ren did not panic. He let Zorak's charge come closer. He waited until the reptilian's shadow touched his boots. Then in one sudden step he shifted to the side, his body turning with sharp control, his left arm snapping up to meet Zorak's striking limb, the motion smooth and precise. A twist of Ren's hips and Zorak's balance broke. The massive reptilian stumbled forward, his weight carrying him past Ren in a clumsy lurch. The crowd gasped, but the fight did not pause. The insectoid's forearms slashed in a blur, but Ren moved like water flowing around stones. He ducked under one arm, caught another in his grip, and used the insectoid's own momentum to pull it off balance. Its legs skittered on the smooth arena floor. Ren stepped inside its guard, striking once into the joint of a lower limb. The alien hissed in pain, stumbling back, and the furred warrior was already on him, claws swinging down. Ren's body dropped low in a sudden crouch, his right leg sweeping in a wide arc. The sweep caught the furred warrior's ankles, sending him crashing to the floor in a twist of limbs. The crowd roared, some in excitement, some in disbelief. The other 7 fighters hesitated just for a breath. The human had dropped 3 attacks in the first moments, without even drawing a weapon. The stillness in his movements was gone now, replaced by a flowing rhythm that kept him just ahead of every strike. One of the avian cadets screeched and launched himself with a burst of wing strength. Claws aimed at Ren's head, but Ren simply shifted his step to the left, raised one arm to block, and with a sharp push sent the avian spinning off course. The alien landed awkwardly, talons scraping against the floor as it fought to regain footing. Zorak turned back with a roar, his tail whipping through the air toward Ren's legs. The human leapt just enough to clear it, landing lightly before stepping forward again. From the outer ring 2 armored fighters from high-gravity worlds moved in together. They swung heavy training hammers in wide arcs, aiming to crush Rin between them. The crowd leaned forward, sensing this might be the moment to stop the human's strange dance. But Rin's eyes tracked them both with cool focus. Just before the arcs of their weapons crossed where he stood, he dropped low and slid forward under one swing, his shoulder striking into the nearest fighter's midsection. The alien grunted as the force lifted him just enough for Rin to twist him around into the path of the second hammer. The weapon struck armor with a deep crack, and the two fighters went down together in a heap of limbs and groans. Gasps rolled through the watching cadets. The instructor's eyes narrowed in sharp interest, and somewhere in the upper seats a senior officer had stopped walking to watch the human in silence. On the arena floor, Rin straightened, breathing steady, his gaze sweeping the remaining fighters, who were now much slower in their approach. Zorak stood with teeth bared. The insectoid flexed its limbs in irritation. The furred warrior growled low in his throat, but none of them moved quite as quickly as before. Rin tilted his head slightly, almost inviting them to try again, his stance loose yet solid, his weight balanced, ready to strike or dodge at the smallest hint of movement. And in that moment the crowd could feel something had changed. This was no longer the simple beating they had expected to watch. This was a display of control, of skill, of a kind of danger that did not shout but whispered, a danger that made even the bravest hesitate. The fighters exchanged quick glances, some shuffling their feet, unsure of how to break the human's rhythm. Zorak spat onto the floor and stepped forward with renewed fury, calling for them all to rush at once, his voice echoing in the high hall. They obeyed, forming a wall of bodies and blades. But Rin's eyes sharpened, his knees bent slightly, and as they came in from every side he moved. It was not frantic movement. It was a storm given shape, a dance of angles and pressure. He struck where their guards were open. He turned one's lunge into a shield against another's strike. He moved through the circle as if he could see every attack before it came. The sound of impacts filled the hall, the groans of fighters hitting the ground, the scuff of boots sliding across the floor, and all the while Rin's breathing stayed steady, the rhythm of someone who was not yet close to tiring. By the time the wave of attacks broke apart, two more fighters lay on the floor, clutching limbs or gasping for air, leaving only a handful still standing. The crowd was no longer laughing, no longer mocking. Their voices were low with awe and a little fear. They had seen something here they had not expected. The Deathworlder was not only surviving, he was winning, and in the eyes of some watching cadets, he was making them believe the old stories might be true. The sound in the hall was strange now. The laughter was gone, the jeers had faded, and in their place was a steady hum of voices low and tense. Cadets leaned forward in their seats, claws gripping railings, eyes wide, some whispering to one another that they had never seen a human fight like this. Others saying maybe this was why Deathworlders were feared in old stories, told by soldiers who had fought near the edge of known space. Below in the ring, Rin Hale stood in the center once more, shoulders loose, head slightly lowered, his gaze moving like the sweep of a blade from one fighter to the next. Only 5 remained on their feet now. Zorak the reptilian stood to Rin's left, his chest rising and falling in heavy breaths, his yellow eyes narrowed with anger and disbelief. The insectoid was to the right, its 4 arms twitching in sharp bursts of motion as it shifted its weight from one leg to the other. The furred warrior from the frozen moon crouched low ahead of Rin, claws ready to leap. Behind them 2 high-gravity fighters with dented armor and strong legs paced in small circles, trying to find an opening. The instructor gave no signal. The fight was still on. The chime had not yet rung. The tension made every step sound louder in the vast hall. Zorak growled deep in his chest and lunged forward, his massive arms swinging in a double strike meant to crush Rin's head and shoulders. The human stepped in, closing the gap faster than Zorak expected, his left hand catching the reptilian's wrist, while his right forearm slammed into the inside of the other arm. Twisting with a sharp pull, there was a sound like stone cracking as Zorak's elbow gave way. The reptilian roared, staggering back. The insectoid came next, its arms a blur, slashing in an X pattern from 4 directions at once. Rin bent at the waist, weaving between the strikes, his hand snapping up to grip 2 limbs, his knee driving hard into the joint where chitin met softer flesh. The insectoid hissed in pain, its balance shifting. Rin pivoted, using the alien's own mass to spin it sideways into the path of the furred warrior, who had just leapt forward. The collision sent both sprawling to the ground in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The two high-gravity fighters saw their moment and charged together, one swinging low with a hammer blow meant to crush knees, the other aiming high with a shoulder strike to the chest. Rin sidestepped the low swing, his hand snapping down to catch the fighter's wrist and guide the heavy strike into the floor. The impact rang through the metal, stunning the attacker. At the same time, Rin twisted his torso, bringing an elbow into the throat of the second fighter mid-charge. The alien stumbled, gasping for breath, and Rin finished with a sharp kick to the chest that sent him sliding back several steps. The crowd erupted in noise, not laughter this time, but a rising roar of shock. They had just watched the human drop 3 more opponents in less than the time it took to take a deep breath. Zorak staggered upright again, his wounded arm hanging at an angle, but his rage burning hotter than before. His tail lashed the ground, leaving a streak across the floor. He shouted something in his native tongue, a guttural cry of challenge, and charged with all his weight, his claws ready to tear. Rin did not back away. Instead, he stepped in once more, his body a coil of power waiting to release. At the last instant, he shifted aside, his hand gripping the base of Zorak's tail, while his other arm hooked around the alien's waist. His legs drove forward with brutal force, and the reptilian's massive body lifted from the ground for a heartbeat before crashing down hard on his back. The sound echoed like a drumbeat in the hall. Zorak's head rolled to the side, his eyes closing. The insectoid was back on its feet now, hissing with fury, its forearms moving with desperate speed. It lunged from the right, striking with 2 upper arms, while the lower pair reached for Rin's legs. The human moved with precision, stepping into the attack rather than away. His left hand caught one upper wrist, his right elbow smashed into another. His knee shot forward into the alien's chest. The insectoid's breath came out in a high clicking gasp, its body folding slightly. Rin shifted his grip, twisted, and the alien hit the floor with a crash. Only the furred warrior remained standing now, his claws gleaming, his breath steaming in the cool air of the hall. He did not rush in. Instead, he began to circle, his yellow eyes never leaving Rin's. The human turned slowly with him, both fighters measuring each other. The crowd had gone quiet again, waiting for the last clash. The furred warrior feinted left, then struck right, claws flashing toward Rin's face. The human dropped low, sliding under the strike, his shoulder slamming into the alien's ribs, the sound of air leaving lungs sharp in the silence. The furred warrior spun with surprising speed, swinging with his other claw, but Rin caught the wrist mid-swing, twisted, and dropped his weight. The alien went over his shoulder, landing hard on the floor, claw scraping against the metal. In one smooth motion, Rin shifted his knee down onto the alien's chest, pinning him in place. The warrior snarled but could not break free. The instructor's voice rang out over the arena. "The match is over." The chimes sounded, high and final, and the noise in the hall swelled into a roar. Some cadets were shouting in excitement, others in disbelief, a few in shock. Rin stood slowly, stepping back from the pinned fighter, his breathing steady, as if he had just taken a short walk rather than fought 10 armed opponents. The instructor stepped into the ring, his feathers ruffled, his sharp eyes sweeping over the 10 bodies on the ground, some groaning, some unmoving except for shallow breaths. The instructor looked at Rin for a long moment, his beak tilting slightly, as if he were trying to decide what to say. Then he turned to the crowd and spoke in a voice that carried to the farthest seat. "Now you see why Deathworlders are not to be underestimated." His words hung in the air like a warning. Rin said nothing. He simply walked toward the edge of the ring, passing Zorak, who was now sitting up with a dazed look in his eyes. The reptilian said nothing either, only watched the human with a mix of hate and something colder, something closer to fear. As Rin stepped out of the combat circle, the crowd parted for him, not because they were told to, but because none wished to stand in his way. The whispers began again, not mocking this time, but full of questions. Who had trained him? What kind of place bred warriors who could fight like that? And how many more like him were out there among the stars? Rin did not answer any of them. His gaze was forward, his step steady, the sound of the match still echoing in the hall behind him, a sound that would not soon be forgotten. The combat hall emptied slowly after the match. the sound of footsteps and murmurs echoing off the high metal walls. Some cadets left with quick strides, their faces hard and unreadable. Others lingered near the railings, watching Rin hail, as if expecting him to suddenly reveal some hidden flaw. But the human walked with the same steady pace he had shown before the fight, his eyes forward, his posture loose but balanced, the faint gleam of sweat on his skin the only sign that he had just gone through a 10-on-1 drill. The instructor remained in the ring, speaking with two senior officers whose armor carried the marks of many campaigns. Their voices were low, yet the tone carried weight. They spoke of the control in the human's movements, of the speed and efficiency, of the fact that not once had he wasted an attack. One officer's eyes followed Rin until he was gone from sight, and there was a glint in that gaze that was not just respect but also calculation. In the locker bay, Rin stripped off his training gear, the clang of metal buckles and the hiss of cooling armor filling the space. A few cadets nearby avoided looking at him directly. Others watched from the corner of their eyes. Zorak entered with his arms strapped in a med brace. The reptilian steps were slow, his tail dragging against the floor. His eyes locked on Rin with an expression that burned like cold fire. The insectoid came in soon after, two of its limbs bound tightly with glowing medical wraps. It did not speak, only clicked its mandibles in short, sharp bursts as it passed. A group of younger cadets gathered near the exit, whispering rapidly. One of them, a slender avian with bright orange feathers, leaned in close to his friends, his voice a low hiss as he spoke of the danger humans might pose to the balance of the academy. He said it was unfair to put 1 against 10 in a public match, that the display was meant to send a message. The others nodded, though whether they agreed or feared to argue was unclear. Rin pulled on a plain dark jacket, the fabric worn but clean, and walked past them without breaking stride. Their whispers stopped until he was gone. Outside the locker bay, the wide training corridors stretched like silver rivers, their floors polished smooth. Rin's boots made a steady rhythm against them. The light from overhead panels reflected in soft glows. He passed a line of cadets preparing for marksmanship drills. Many of them looked at him. A few gave quick nods of respect, but some turned away sharply, their shoulders stiff. The academy was a place of pride, and pride wounded too easily when a stranger came and shattered the unspoken hierarchy in a single morning. In the mess hall, the air was thick with the scent of alien spices and steaming food, tables filled with cadets from dozens of worlds. The noise of clattering trays and low conversation mixing with bursts of laughter from distant corners. Rin took a seat near the edge of the hall, his tray holding only simple rations. He ate slowly, his mind somewhere else. Across the room, Zorak entered with two companions from his homeworld, their scales patterned in the same deep green as his. They did not approach, but their eyes followed Rin like predators watching a rival. The insectoid sat at another table, its mandibles still clicking softly as it stared at him, and in the farthest corner the furred warrior leaned against a wall, his claws tapping against the metal in a steady rhythm that spoke of patience. The tension spread like a quiet current through the room. Some cadets whispered to each other. Others simply watched in silence. A few avoided looking at all, knowing that to be caught staring might bring them unwanted attention. Rin kept eating, unhurried, his eyes occasionally scanning the hall, marking positions and exits the way a soldier might in a danger zone. When he finished, he stood, carried his tray to the return slot, and left without a word. The silence that followed his departure was heavier than before. In the upper levels of the academy, a meeting was taking place in a sealed chamber. The senior officers who had watched the match stood around a glowing table that displayed a holographic record of the fight. They slowed the playback, pointing out Rin's movements, the efficiency of his strikes, the precision in his footwork. One officer remarked that such skill was not natural for someone so young. Another suggested that perhaps the human had already seen battle before joining. The instructor, who had run the drill, said nothing for a time, then finally spoke, his voice quiet but certain. That cadet is more dangerous than most of the graduates we send into the field, and if his loyalty ever wavered, the cost would be high. Meanwhile, Rin walked along one of the long observation corridors that looked out over the endless void of space. Beyond the reinforced glass, the stars stretched like a river of light, distant worlds glittering among the dark. He stood there for a long moment, his reflection faint in the glass, his mind running through the fight again, not in pride but in analysis, remembering each move, each reaction, each moment where he had been a breath away from taking a strike. He knew this match had painted a target on his back, not only from those he had defeated but from those who feared what he represented. In the days that followed, the pressure built quietly. Training assignments changed without warning, placing Rin in squads with cadets who barely hid their dislike. Weapons drills paired him with those who struck harder than necessary. Sparring matches were scheduled against fighters known for their brutality. In every case, Rin adapted, his movements calm, his focus steady, never giving them the satisfaction of seeing him rattle. Yet every day the circle of those who respected him shrank as the circle of those who saw him as a threat grew larger. One evening, as the training cycle ended, Rin stepped into the lift to return to his quarters. Zorak entered behind him. The reptilian's eyes locked on him in the mirror of the lift wall. The silence was thick, the hum of the lift almost loud in comparison. Halfway up, the reptilian spoke in a voice low and rough. "This place is not for you, human." Rin did not answer. He simply met Zorak's gaze in the reflection. The lift doors opened, and without another word Rin stepped out, leaving the reptilian standing inside with a faint hiss escaping his throat. That night in his quarters, Rin sat on the edge of his bunk, the dim light casting shadows across the small room. He could feel the shift in the academy's air, the way every look lingered too long, the way voices dropped when he entered a room. This was not just rivalry. It was the slow build of something deeper, something that could turn dangerous if pushed. Outside his narrow window, the stars moved in their endless paths, cold and bright, and Rin knew the next challenge he faced might not be in the ring at all, but in the corridors, the mess hall, or the training yard when no instructor was near. In the darkness, his eyes stayed open long after the lights went out, his breathing slow, his mind already preparing. Because in a place like the academy where pride and power meant survival, the real fights were the ones no chime ever started and no instructor ever ended. The air inside the combat arena was heavy with noise, and the smell of sweat and fear, and the sound of alien boots scraping against the floor echoed like distant drums, while the remaining opponents of Rin Hale moved in a slow circle around him, trying to trap him from every side, because they still believed numbers could break him. But their eyes showed a different truth, and that truth was doubt and fear, and the thought that maybe this human was not what they had been told maybe he was far worse than they imagined. Rin stood in the center with his knees slightly bent, and his shoulders relaxed, and his hands open at his sides like he was ready to catch the air itself and throw it back at them, and his breathing was slow and steady while the others were gasping and shifting their weight and trying to hide the way their claws or weapons trembled in their grips, and the crowd high above was silent, now leaning over the railings, like they were watching something ancient and dangerous, a predator surrounded by prey. One alien, a tall insectoid with shimmering green plates across his chest, clicked his mandibles and gave a short signal to the others, and they all moved together in a sudden rush, the insectoid leaping forward with his blades swinging down from above, while another short and thick alien, with heavy arms, charged from the left, and the third opponent, a snake-like creature with 4 muscular arms, slid across the floor from the right, aiming to coil around Rin and crush him with sheer strength. Rin did not step back, and he did not panic. Instead, he let the insectoid's blades come close enough to feel the cold wind they made, and then he twisted his body, so the first strike missed his head by the width of a finger, and with the same motion his hand shot up, grabbed the insectoid's forearm, and pushed it sideways into the path of the heavy-armed alien from the left, and the two crashed together, with a sharp grunt of pain from both. The snake-like alien lunged with speed, but Rin dropped low to the ground, his hand sliding across the smooth floor to hook behind the creature's lowest arm, and then with one sharp pull he unbalanced it, sending its long body slamming into the arena wall with a heavy thud, and the sound of the crowd gasping filled the air. The insectoid tried to recover, but Rin stepped in close, his elbow smashing into the alien's side, right where the armor plates met, and a sharp cracking sound rang out, making the insectoid stagger back, clutching his ribs, and struggling to stay upright. The heavy-armed alien swung a huge fist at Rin's head, but Rin ducked and moved inside the swing, driving his palm upward into the alien's chin with enough force to lift the large body off the ground for a heartbeat before it crashed back down limp and dazed. The snake-like alien was still trying to rise when Rin moved toward it, his foot pressing down hard on one coiled section of its body, and his knee dropping into its upper torso, forcing the air out of its lungs and leaving it wheezing. And still the crowd began to cheer now, because the fight was changing in a way they had not expected. The human was not just surviving, he was controlling every move. 2 of the 3 attackers were down, and the insectoid was struggling to breathe, its movement slower. Now its strikes weaker. Rin shifted his stance again and stepped toward it, catching one last wild swing and turning the arm until the joint made a sharp popping sound. The alien screamed and fell to its knees, clutching the damaged limb, and Rin stepped back, scanning the circle that was no longer a circle because there were only 3 left standing. Those 3 had once laughed at him in the beginning. They had looked at him like prey, but now their eyes showed the truth. They were prey, and he was the hunter, and that thought made them hesitate, and hesitation was all Rin needed, because he stepped toward the nearest one, a tall, thin alien with skin like stone, and before it could decide to move, Rin's foot came up, driving into its midsection with such force that the alien folded in half and fell coughing on the floor. The second of the 3 tried to attack, while Rin's leg was still raised, but Rin shifted his weight backward and caught the incoming arm, turning it aside and pushing forward. So the alien tripped over the fallen stone-skinned cadet and tumbled to the ground, where Rin's knee landed against its shoulder, pinning it until it stopped struggling. The last of the 3 looked around and saw every one of its allies on the floor groaning or silent, and its hands shook and its breathing came fast. But it tried one last time to charge at Rin with a desperate yell. The sound was more fear than courage, and Rin let it come close before twisting aside, grabbing its arm and spinning it toward the arena, while the impact left it still. The instructor watched all of this without a word, his face unreadable, but his eyes sharp, as if measuring every movement Rin made. And in the stands, cadets from dozens of worlds sat frozen, some with their mouths open, and others leaning forward, unable to believe what they were seeing. Rin looked at the fallen forms around him, his chest rising and falling slowly, and there was no smile on his face and no sign of strain, only the same calm focus he had when the match began. And the crowd realized that maybe he had not even shown all of what he could do, and that thought sent a chill through the arena. In the quiet that followed, the sounds of groaning opponents and heavy breathing from the beaten cadets filled the air, and Rin turned away from them, not to gloat, not to celebrate, but simply to wait for whatever came next, because for him the fight was not about proving himself to them, it was about survival, and on a death world, survival was never about numbers, it was about skill and will and the refusal to fall no matter how many. The arena floor was still scattered with the bodies of the defeated when the instructor finally raised one hand, and the heavy gates began to close with a slow grinding sound, and the crowd's voices rose again, not in jeers or laughter, but in low murmurs of disbelief, as the human cadet walked calmly toward the center, his boots leaving faint marks on the dust-covered tiles, while his eyes stayed locked on the gate ahead, because he knew that this fight was not the end, it was only the surface of something much deeper. The gate slammed shut, and the light above the arena dimmed until only the faint glow from the walls remained, casting long shifting shadows across the floor, and the instructor's voice echoed through the darkness, telling the cadets that the test was over, and those who could stand should leave through the side passages, but Rin was to remain where he was. The words came with a tone that carried more weight than a command. It was the kind of tone that told everyone else to stay away, because what came next was not for their eyes. The remaining alien cadets dragged themselves toward the exits, some leaning on each other, others limping alone, their heads turned away from Rin as if afraid to meet his gaze, and soon the arena was almost empty except for Rin, the instructor, and the sound of something moving in the shadows above it was a faint scrape, followed by another, and then a whispering noise that did not belong to any voice. He knew it was thin and cold, like air passing over broken glass. The instructor stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Rin, and his voice lower now as he said that the next part of the trial was a tradition, for only one cadet each cycle, the strongest, won, the one who showed not only strength, but control, and will the one who could face what the Academy kept hidden from the others. Rin asked no questions, he simply nodded and waited, and the instructor gave a small signal toward the dark ceiling above. Something began to descend from the shadows, a shape that did not move like any creature Rin had seen before. Its body was covered in black armor that seemed to shift and ripple like oil, and its eyes glowed a dim orange in the dark. Its limbs were too long and too thin, bending at strange angles, and in its hands it carried no weapons. But Rin felt the danger from it like heat from fire. It landed without a sound, and the arena floor seemed to vibrate from the weight of its presence. The whispering grew louder, but it was not from its mouth. It was inside his head. The words twisted and unclear, but they carried emotion, sharp and cold, fear mixed with hunger, and something else, something curious. The creature circled him slowly, and every step it took left a faint shimmer on the ground like frost forming on metal. Rin stayed still, his eyes following every movement, and his body ready to shift in any direction in a breath. Then, without warning, it moved faster than thought, one long arm snapping toward his throat. But Rin bent backward, letting the strike pass over him, and he rolled to the side, coming up on one knee, his hand brushing the floor. As he steadied himself, the creature turned its head in a jerking motion, like it was studying him, and the whispering in his mind shifted now, carrying a strange edge of excitement, as if it had found something rare. It attacked again, this time both arms sweeping forward in a blur, and Rin stepped in between the strikes, his shoulder slamming into its chest and forcing it back a step. But the surface of its armor was cold and slick, and his push only made it slide to the side. It twisted around him faster than any opponent he had faced, and its long fingers clawed at his back, tearing a line across his training gear, but not reaching skin. Rin spun with the force of the attack, catching its arm and pulling it forward into his knee. The impact made the creature release a sound like grinding metal, and the orange light in its eyes flared brighter. For a moment it lashed out with its other hand, but Rin ducked under and drove his elbow into its side, where the armor plates met, feeling a small give under the strike. The whispering in his mind became sharper, now almost angry, but still holding that strange excitement, as if it wanted to see more of what he could do. The fight became a blur of movement, strikes and counters, the creature's limbs bending in impossible ways, Rin's feet sliding and planting with precision, each motion measured to waste no strength. And as they moved, the light in the arena seemed to fade even more, until only their shapes and the faint glow of its eyes could be seen. The air grew colder, the whispering louder, filling his thoughts with images he could not fully understand, images of worlds burning and skies torn apart, and a shape like this one standing among the ruins, watching without emotion. Rin pushed the visions aside, focusing only on the movement, the weight, the timing. He waited for the moment the creature overreached, and when it came, he stepped inside its guard, grabbing both of its arms and twisting hard. Its body bent, but did not break. Instead, it slid to the ground and spun, its legs catching Rin's feet and pulling him down. The impact with the floor sent a jolt through his back, but he rolled away before its claws could find him again. They faced each other once more, both moving slower now, but with more care, each waiting for the other to give even the smallest opening. Rin felt the cold in his lungs, now the air thin and sharp, but he did not let it show. He took one slow step forward, then another, and the creature mirrored him until they were only a breath apart. And then Rin shifted all his weight into a single strike, driving his palm into the center of its chest. With every ounce of force he had, the armor dented inward with a deep hollow sound, and the orange light in its eyes flickered like a dying flame. It staggered back 2 steps, then 3, the whispering in his mind breaking into fragments, then fading to nothing, and with a slow, almost graceful motion, it sank to one knee, then the other, before falling forward to the ground, silent, and still. The frost on the floor began to fade, and the cold in the air lifted, leaving only the sound of Rin's steady breathing. The instructor stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying through the empty arena, telling Rin that the trial was past, and that what he faced was called a shade, a creature from beyond the mapped stars, one that had destroyed whole worlds, and yet he had stood against it, and won. The meaning was clear to them both. The war beyond the academy was closer than anyone wanted to admit, and Rin Hale had just been marked as one of the few who might survive it. The echo of the shade's fall had not faded when the instructor placed a small black device into Rin's hand and told him that his training was over, but his real test had just begun. The device pulsed once with a faint red light, and a single narrow path opened in the far wall of the arena, revealing a corridor made of dark stone that seemed older than the academy itself. The air that came from it was colder and carried a smell like ancient metal and dust. Rin walked forward, his steps slow and steady, the weight of the device heavy in his palm, though it could not have weighed more than a few grams. The walls of the corridor seemed to close around him as he moved deeper, and the faint sound of the crowd above was gone, replaced by a low vibration that came through the floor into his boots. The light was dim and came from no visible source. It was as if the stone itself gave off a ghostly glow, enough to guide his way, but never enough to let him see far ahead. The path twisted in slow turns, each one revealing nothing new, until finally the space opened into a chamber vast and empty except for a single circular gate. Standing in the center, it was taller than 3 men and wider than any doorway he had seen. Its surface a swirl of silver and black that moved like water, though it made no sound. The red light from the device in his hand grew brighter, and the gate responded, its surface rippling outward, as if sensing his presence. A figure stepped from the shadows behind the gate, tall and robed in deep gray, the hood covering most of its face, but leaving its mouth visible. When it spoke, its voice was neither male nor female, but something between, and it told Rin that the gate was the oldest weapon of their kind, a path, not just through space, but through the folds of war itself, a bridge that led to the place where the true enemy lived, and that once he stepped through, he would not return the same, if he returned at all. Rin asked nothing because questions would not change what was coming. The robed figure continued speaking, telling him that the academy was only a surface mask for something far greater, a network of hidden forces prepared for the moment the enemy finally reached their worlds. The figure spoke of worlds already fallen, of fleets turned to drifting ash, and of soldiers who had crossed the gate never to be seen again, but it also spoke of the few who had crossed and lived long enough to strike the enemy deep and change the shape of the war. The red light on the device began to pulse faster, the rhythm almost like a heartbeat. The robed figure stepped aside, making way for Rin to approach the gate. The closer he came, the more the surface of the swirling metal seemed to pull at him, not with force, but with the strange certainty that whatever waited beyond was already aware of him. The air near it was colder still and carried a faint scent of something sharp and unfamiliar, like the edge of lightning before a storm. He stopped at the base of the gate, the red light in his hand steady now, as the voice of the robed figure told him this was his choice. No one could push him through, and no one could stop him if he turned back. But if he did go forward, then every skill, every fight, every moment of pain and learning in the academy would finally meet its purpose. Rin looked at the surface of the gate, and for a moment saw shapes in its shadows moving as if on the other side of a thick veil. The whispers came again, faint at first, then clearer, not from the shade, not from anything in the arena, but from beyond the gate. The voices were layered, speaking in languages he did not know yet, somehow understood, fragments of warning, fragments of challenge, and something else that felt like recognition. The cold rose through his body and settled in his chest, but his hand did not shake. He took one slow breath, then stepped forward and through the gate, without hesitation. The sensation was not like falling and not like walking. It was like being pulled through a river without water, a current that pressed on every part of him and filled his mind with flashes of places too fast to hold, worlds of black glass skies burning in colors he had no name for, shapes moving among them with eyes like the shade, yet not the same. When the pull ended, he was standing on a plain of gray stone stretching to the horizon under a sky that shifted between day and night without pause. Far ahead, a structure rose sharp and angular, like a blade driven into the ground, its surface black and alive with slow pulses of red light, and at its base movement caught his eye, ranks of figures marching in silence, their forms tall and armored, their faces hidden behind masks that glowed faintly. Each step they took in perfect unison sent a faint tremor through the stone, and Rin realized they were not marching toward him, but toward something beyond the horizon. A sudden noise broke the silence, a sound like air tearing apart, and from the ground around him more figures began to rise. They were not like the soldiers in the distance, and not like the shade in the arena. They were smaller, quicker, their limbs sharp, and their heads bent forward. Like predators, their bodies flickered between solid and mist, and their eyes shone a cold, white light. The whispers in his mind sharpened again, and now he could tell they came from these things, each one pushing thoughts toward him, thoughts of weakness, of surrender, of stillness. Rin drew the training blade at his side, feeling the weight familiar and grounding. He did not wait for them to strike. The first one leapt forward, and he met it with a clean cut that passed through as if through smoke, yet left the shape crumbling to the ground. He turned with the motion, cutting down another, then another, but they kept coming, moving faster, their forms shifting, so that each strike had to be measured and precise. He moved, without pause, his body working on instinct born from every fight, every lesson and every moment he had pushed past exhaustion in the academy. As the last of them fell silent, the plane around him seemed to still, the sky freezing in place for the first time, and the black structure in the distance pulsed brighter. As if it had noticed him, a deep sound rolled across the plain, not from the ground, but from the sky itself, and in that sound was something he had felt only once before in the arena, when the shade had looked at him with its burning eyes. It was the same recognition, the same silent challenge. Rin tightened his grip on the blade and began to walk toward the structure, his steps echoing on the endless stone. The whispers were gone, now replaced by the steady beat of his own breath and the faint red pulse that came from the heart of the black fortress. He knew that whatever waited there was more than just another fight. It was the reason the gate existed, the reason the academy had trained him, and the reason he had been chosen above all others, and he was ready